Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Elizabeth Cohen.
And this is the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie Ross is a parent educator and counselor with over 30 years of experience in private practice.
Elizabeth is a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience in private practice.
Perhaps most importantly, we're parents just like you.
Through conversations covering a wide range of different parenting topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you some practical tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. But with a few skills under our belts, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Welcome back to the Parenting Horizons podcast. I'm Julie Ross, and I am here with my superb co-host, Elizabeth Cohen. How are you doing, Elizabeth? How are things going?
I'm doing great. I really love when we get to sit together and share and talk to guests. It's such a highlight of my life. So
I'm so
happy
glad.
to be here.
It is for me as well. And today, speaking of guests, we have a guest with us today. Her name is Emilie Vogas. And for reference, that's spelled Emilie, Vogas with a V as in Victor. You're going to want that information as our listeners because I know you're going to be interested in what she has to say, and you're going to probably want to contact her either for private sessions or a workshop. Emilie, why don't you just give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to be here today as well. My name is Emilie Vogas, like Julie said, and I have a master's in education and 3 young kids of my own. And I really came into this topic surrounding food and behavior surrounding food through my own challenges with eating and my relationship with food growing up. And really, my goal in all of this is to provide structure and support to parents to help them establish good food relationships with their own, for their own children with food. So I provide that through workshops. I provide that through private counseling on both food-related topics and other kind of boundary setting topics. And yeah, I love this topic. I think it's a really important one because we as a society don't have a great relationship with food. And so that it's complicated, and I'm really trying to help parents create a new generation of children who have good relationships with food.
Thanks for sharing that, how you've come to this work, Emilie. I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability around that. And I think it's so important that you're not just giving suggestions, you're living it and you have lived it. That lived experience, I think, especially with food, which we're going to talk more about, is such a base need, is so important. I actually noticed myself having chills as we're talking about it because it's so important that you've lived it so that when you're helping parents, we know you're the expert in all ways. And so I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah,
really
thank you. I mean, it's great. And I think it's having been on both sides of it, having had a really tumultuous relationship with food growing up, that creates a set of expectations, and then having children of my own and trying to not do that to my own kids, it's way easier said than done. So being in it and having lived the really hard parts where I just want to give my child chicken nuggets every night because that would make it so much easier. I think that I try to bring that perspective to all of this as well, and validate the experience of the parent, which is just, this is really, really, really hard.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. So many times I've sat on the couch with my husband and we've said, gosh, if we just used fear and control as a parenting technique, everything would be
So much
easier.
easier. Yeah.
So parenting this way, consciously, openly, vulnerably, it's so much harder. Of course, it's so much more rewarding. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that, Emily. I echo what Elizabeth said, that, you sharing that you've lived this experience of having a complicated relationship with food in the past has really informed you. And I think that that's so helpful for our listeners to know that you're coming from that kind of foundational place, not just a theoretical place, right? And I am not at all about theory myself in the way that I counsel parents. I'm really about practical strategies. So let's dig in. There's so many places that we could start with this. Clearly, one place to start would be with infancy. Like, how do you begin to feed your children once they're off the bottle or breast, and how do you begin to feed them? But I think maybe what we should do is say, it seems backwards, but save that maybe if there's time at the end, so that, because my guess is that our listeners are going to be primarily parents of young children as opposed to infants. And I could be wrong about that. But why don't you say kind of what do you see? And Elizabeth, you chime in too. And certainly I could. What are kind of the common mistakes that parents make? Or conversely, what are the common issues that come up at the table when food is present?
I mean, I think that first and foremost, whatever challenges you have as a parent with food, that's what's going to come at the table. That is 100% what's going to rear its ugly head. So regardless of how old your child is, and I think that, when you do I have kind of one who's a little bit older and then two who are much younger. When you're really starting solids, it's really good to try to examine when you're starting solids all the way through, regardless of where you are on this journey. It's really good to kind of take a step back and look at your own relationship with food and try to kind of examine where those pitfalls might present themselves. And honestly, you might not know, though. That's the kind of hard part, is that you might not know until you're in it and you go, oh my gosh, this is incredibly infuriating, frustrating. I am like completely, I hesitate to use the word triggered, but I'm completely just feel super out of control in this moment. And that's the moment that you go, oh, okay, maybe this is an issue for me. So I think that a lot of what parents are most confused by or frustrated by is the idea of giving structure to a mealtime and at the same time not being overly controlling. So the kind of feeling of that those two things may be in conflict in a multitude of different ways. So whether that means, what you're feeding your child, the kind of structure and boundaries that need to be around that can be very, very frustrating for a parent. And also just the like physical aspect of like sitting down at a table, of manners, quote unquote, that, and setting the boundaries surrounding the physical component of it. Both of those things are really, really challenging. And then parents really do want to give their kid the opportunity to make their own choices and to be autonomous about their own body. And so how do you set those boundaries, both with regards to what's served at the meal and what physically you're doing during that meal, and also allow your child to feel in control of their own relationship with food? So I think that's the main issue.
So, Emily, thank you so much for that reflection. And I have a question. It sounds like what you might be suggesting, and I just want to confirm this with you, is that when parents are starting to notice some struggles with eating at any stage, it might be a good prompt to ask themselves, what's my relationship to food, and what's my history maybe with feeding and being fed?
Absolutely. And I think like I said before, I think that's a hard thing to do. And I'm a big proponent of therapy. So if you're in therapy, that's a great opportunity to say, hey, my therapist, let's talk about this. Because I think it's a hard thing to do introspectively solo. But if you have a sounding board, whether that be a therapist, whether that be a friend who's maybe going through the same like situation, that can be really helpful, or a friend who has already gone through this situation where their children are older or younger, that can be really helpful to have kind of a sounding board and somebody to talk to about your relationship with food. And often I find that parents of the same age, not of necessarily the children are the same age, but like that the parents themselves are the same age, often wind up discovering that they have the same issues surrounding food. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that our society as a whole goes through these stages of like, fat is bad, sugar is bad, skinny is good, whatever the fad may be of eating or body image, that we go through these kind of waves as a society. And so if you grew up in that wave, that's kind of how your body image, your relationship with food is going to be reflected. And so if you have parents who are similar aged as you are, that can be really helpful to kind of go back and say, okay, like this is what I'm feeling, and often kind of get that validation, and also be able to kind of put it aside and say, okay, that's from my own childhood. That's from the society that I grew up in, the culture that I grew up in, and then kind of try to not tuck it away, but be really mindful of it as you're feeding your children.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great suggestion. I just want to ask one more question about this, which might be a theoretical question, but it's making me think as a therapist that there's a questionnaire that we do sometimes in interview. It's called an attachment interview. And one of the questions is kind of who fed you, what were meal times like, with this kind of equating food with love, or and so I'm wondering also, if we could encourage our listeners as you're looking at, I love what you said about what were the fads during that time.
Yeah.
And then also, how was love communicated? And was food one of the ways it was, or it wasn't? I think that might be interesting too.
Yeah,
if you agree with that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to, it's all so intertwined. It's a really tricky, it's not just a single, like, this is your easy fix, which I wish it were, because that would make everybody's lives so much easier. But I think that it also is a good opportunity to look at kind of how we respond to authority figures, whether that be our parents or whether that be doctors. I know that my relationship with food was very, very influenced by my pediatrician, ultimately, who kind of fed information to my parents, and they responded because an authority figure told them, like, this is the way your daughter is overweight, that she needs to, cut back. And that's what they fed, that's the information that they were fed from an authority figure. And then that came through to me. But to examine that as parents, to kind of, I'm not saying to not pay attention to doctors. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, to just examine that and to really kind of think through, okay, so this is kind of the way that my relationship with my pediatrician is, like, can I come back to them and talk really honestly about this? And do I have the relationship with authority figures to do that, to feel comfortable and healthy doing that? Because I think that that's really a crucial component too, is having an open relationship with the authority figures of the doctors, specialists, whoever you're working with. And that really can make a difference in terms of how you approach all of this as well.
I love what you just said, Emilie. What made me think of is, how do you feel with your pediatrician? How do you feel with authority? It's all the same thing of what do you like to eat?
Right.
It's like this, right? It's like this skill of who am I and what do I like?
Right. And I also I always try to encourage parents to go to their pediatrician first, to make sure that we're not dealing with, sometimes there are physical things going on, whether that be an eating, a physical eating disorder, of the swallowing, the mechanisms of chewing and swallowing and all that, or whether that be something like ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is a much bigger, more complicated disorder than just picky eating. So making sure that you do have that relationship to be able to go to your pediatrician and say, okay, are we good? We're clear. You don't have any concerns about my child eating for whatever reason. And then you can kind of go into the self-reflection and the support of your child going forward from that.
I think that makes perfect sense. The two biggest things that I hear from parents in my practice really do, I mean, everything you've said, Emily, it has to do with their relationship with food more than anything. For example, the parents seem to divide their children into two main categories, which is my child is fat and eats too much. A hearty eater is what I call it, a hearty eater, or my child is a picky eater. And so much has to do with societal, what we call norms, how society tells us children should look, all the bad advice I think that we've gotten over the years about you need 3 square meals a day. And, so parents restrict their child during non-meal hours and that kind of thing. And I find, generally speaking, for the parents who have what they call hearty eaters, they're very, very concerned about the child gaining weight. And so what they typically do, which is a huge mistake in my opinion, is that they withdraw food from the hearty eater. And for the picky eater, they chase them with food. So can you speak to that a little bit? Let's just talk about a child let's talk about the picky eater to start, because you have to clean your plate. The clean plate club. You can't have dessert until you eat your broccoli. The parents' preconceptions of what they think the child should be doing. How do you kind of handle that? How do you address that with the parents?
First off, I try to remind parents that, like with so many things in life, a lot of this ebbs and flows. So every child will go through a picky eating saga, a picky eating time in their lives. It's biological. We are literally evolved to the moment that we stop drinking breast milk or formula, whatever the case may be, the biological mechanisms start to kick in of like, okay, but I could eat something that could hurt me. So they become picky because it's an evolutionarily driven characteristic to preserve life. So that kind of picky eating starts kind of pretty soon after weaning, and sometimes you'll see it a little bit later, honestly, because we wean early as a society. We kind of say that year is where we cut off the formula, because it's just easier to think about it that way rather than to say, well, whatever works for you as a family, which is really what it should be. But because that is a harder line to draw in the sand for a lot of families, a lot of pediatricians, they kind of say, okay, up to a year is where we want the bulk of the nutrition to be coming from breast milk or formula. And then we kick into really kind of focusing on solids. But anytime in that like 1 to 3, even 4, that's kind of where that picky eating can present itself, because that's kind of where their bodies would want to stop taking their nutrition from breast milk or formula. So everybody goes through picky eating. And the key component to that, and it's really the same with a hearty eater, is to not become a short order cook. I think that kind of winds up being the easiest point of reference for any parent, because the temptation for a picky eater is to follow them around with anything they might eat and try to shove it in their playroom, in the bathroom, in the bedroom. Like, they follow them around with food, and anything that they really prefer, that's the temptation, is to just kind of follow them around. And with a hearty eater, it's kind of the opposite, where you really, really restrict and say, okay, well, only this is what you can eat.
I'm reminded of, this evolutionarily driven picky eating thing. I never knew about it until just now, but I'm reminded about how when my son was young and I was cooking in the kitchen and they came in and they said, "Is that pig butt? I don't eat pig butt." And and, and I laughed and I thought, what in the world? First of all, where did they get that, pig butt phrase? But also I think it's a fear of new things. They're neophobic. Right, for about the first 3 years of their life. Am I correct in that? I mean, I'm asking you two
Yeah.
experts as well. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Emily, and correct me if I'm wrong and elaborate, please, is that we need to present kids with a variety of foods to choose from without being a short order cook, but like, kind of everything. And if they don't want to eat the broccoli, they have other nutritional options on their plate. If they, want to have 5 servings of broccoli, that's also okay, right? Is that kind of what I'm hearing, is that we want to present food in a more neutral way or nuanced way?
Yeah. So, and I think the question earlier was that, what is your main recommendation for picky eaters? And that, yeah, the key component is not to be a short order cook, and what's on the menu is on the menu, and that's what's on your plate. And so the idea that they have choices, we always try to make sure that they have a safe food on their plate, so something that they will eat, that they like, but then that there is other components on their plate that they may not be as familiar with, and then but that's what's for dinner. That is what's on the plate. That's it. And that if they choose not to eat, that's okay. That's their choice, right? Like, they absolutely can choose to not eat. And that's very scary for a lot of parents because it makes it feel like they're never going to eat again. I think people really quickly go down the rabbit hole of, oh my goodness, if my child doesn't eat this meal, then they're never going to eat again. And we're going to just have to go in and, have a G tube put in or what. Like, people go really, really, really dark really quickly. I think it has a lot to do with our society's relationship with food. And so we kind of, as parents, take that and run with it. And also probably has to do a lot with, honestly, what we see on social media and the prevalence of just the fact that we can see other people struggling with different things in their feeding journeys. And so that can be really reassuring, but that it can also be really scary because we can see some really drastic stuff that goes along that we may not have any of the context for. So we may have kids who do have G tubes, and that is what feeds them. And that's amazing because thank goodness we have that medical intervention, but we may not have the whole story. And so people see it on social media, latch onto it and say, oh my gosh, if my kid is picky eater and they don't eat, then that's where we're going to go, rather than seeing all the myriad steps that are in between there.
So they really look into what I call the negative crystal ball.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
the negative crystal ball never foresees anything wonderful, ever. It's all, they're going to die of malnutrition. They're going to be, in a wheelchair their whole life because they're so overweight. They're going to be heroin addicts under the bridge. I mean, negative crystal ball is really something that we need to be aware
really
of,
powerful,
I think, as parents, and to really get rid of it and to realize when it's lying to you.
And it's related to our podcast we did a couple months ago about focusing on the facts of now, that when you start catastrophizing, as we call it in CBT, about the future, of saying what is happening right now, what is actually happening right now in front of me, instead of this, catastrophic fear. And I agree with you, Emily. I think there's so much catastrophic fear. One thing I hear a lot is, okay, but if I don't, short order cook to my kid, then they'll never be interested they'll only eat that one thing on the plate. They'll never have any more interest. And they feel like then they can't introduce things. And I think as I'm saying this, I'm noticing, like, actually it's the parents who lose control, and they might be feeling a little uncomfortable with that. Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a key component. Well, and because parents then do want that control, they then only, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we turn into this really kind of vicious cycle of, well, this is the only thing that I know my kid's going to eat, and so that's what I'm going to cook for them, and so that's the only thing they eat, and so and it just goes
Yeah.
in on itself. And as a parent myself, I feel that so hard because at the end of the day, when I am exhausted, it has been a long day. My kid comes home kind of unregulated from school just because, thank goodness, because that means that we're his safe place. But he can come home a little unregulated. And he, all I want to do is get him fed and in bed and have my 5 seconds of alone time. Um, it's really tempting to just give him chicken nuggets because that's what I know he will eat. And I know that we can get a full belly and get him going rather than the kind of sometimes uncomfortable conversations of like, yeah, no, this is what's for dinner tonight. And maybe that causes a whole, no, I don't want to eat that. It's yucky. Sometimes I just don't feel like I have the energy to do it. So it's really tempting to then just give them whatever they want to eat and put it aside. And I'm not saying actually necessarily that that's always the worst thing to do. There are times when that's absolutely acceptable. And you take the short win and you go, yep, you're gonna have chicken nuggets tonight because today has been a mess and I'm exhausted, and that's what you're gonna get.
I appreciate also what you said earlier about having the friends and the support. I feel like
Yes.
that's the moment where you send a text to your friend and you're like, oh my God, this is so hard. The last thing I want to do is cook this breast of chicken, but I'm going to do it. Right. So you kind of get the support in how hard it is so that you can act from a different place potentially.
Yes, absolutely. And that way you don't feel like you're the only person in the world dealing with this situation because you're not. You're really, really not. There are parents all over the country, all over the world dealing with this exact same thing in that moment, like really and truly. And that is crucial to be reminded of.
I feel like maybe we should just name also, Julie and Emilie, I'm wondering, this is coming up for me, is that, that cooking different kinds of food, having access to different kinds of food, there are people in this world who don't have that. And there is a privilege in some ways 100%. That I just kind of want to name with that. I know we all really want about naming that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That it is 100% a point of privilege to be able to think through this in this way. The majority, unfortunately, of parents that I typically work with do not live in food deserts. They have the socioeconomic means to cook at night, to be able to buy food from the grocery. All of those things contribute to the kind of setup that I'm talking about. And there are some phenomenal resources out there for parents who are on WIC or on food assistance programs to kind of work with them through mitigating picky eating or helping with food relationships on a budget or on in less of a place of privilege. And that's phenomenal. And the work that they do is really, really important because we don't all have access to the kind of variety and time and money that allow for this.
So Emilie, I'm curious, like bringing it to a specific situation type of things as opposed to generally picky eaters or generally hearty eaters. What would you say, this is kind of a Q&A, what would you say to a parent? Well, I'm going to ask you a harder question in a minute, but what do you say to the parent of a hearty eater who says, they eat everything on their plate, they ask for seconds, and then they eat all the scraps off of other people's plates? I mean, how do you handle that?
I mean, it's tricky because I do think that we have a pretty significant fear of we're a very fat phobic society, which makes it really tricky for parents to kind of navigate that and for them to see that like some bodies are built to be bigger. Some bodies are, we all have our like place where our body is happiest being. And I think that when that goes over a certain BMI, which is a whole, I can't even go into that. There's so many problems with BMI.
Yeah, it's based on animals, not humans, but that's a whole other podcast. Whole other podcast.
But whenever, like, if we go outside of this kind of really tiny little box that society has set up as like an ideal or healthy quote unquote weight, it makes people feel very uncomfortable. And so having a hearty eater or a kid who's a little bit bigger physically, that doesn't mean anything. It means that that's where their body wants to be. But if you kind of find a kid who's kind of gorging at meal times, split that up into a bunch of different little tiny meals. We're not actually meant to have 3 meals a day. We're meant to have like kind of more smaller, I don't want to say grazing because that kind of gives the impression that you're just laying out food and they can come at it whenever they want. Because I don't think that necessarily, that has a tendency to promote some mindless eating. And we don't want to necessarily go down that path because that's tricky for teaching a child how to listen to their own body and stuff like that.
I've read somewhere that we should plan for 6 mini meals a day, and that's actually good for all of us, no matter what our ages are.
All of us.
So that we don't feel
Absolutely.
like we don't have the fear of being hungry in an hour, so that we don't overeat because we're like, oh, I can't make it the 3 hours till lunchtime or whatever, or what happens if I feel those feelings of hunger. So if you have a planned time, this is the first mini meal, this is the second mini meal, and that way the child or the adult doesn't fear being deprived of something.
Restriction.
Being deprived of something.
Yeah. And that's the tricky part, I think, with setting a boundary around like having seconds or whatever. I would want you to ask them what their body is feeling and have them check back in and say, hey, it sounds like maybe you're still hungry. What is your belly saying right now? And see what they come back with. And that way you're not saying, no, you can't have more food. Because I actually think that really what I would suggest is to say, hey, it sounds like you're still hungry. Tell me more. Talk to me. Are you still hungry right now? Is that what your belly is feeling? Are you thirsty? Is that what your belly is feeling? Just go into it with an attitude of curiosity rather than of restriction.
I love that.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I'm glad you said that. Very often these families are families who already, because they're a hearty eater, have already made a lot of rules.
Yes.
And so the thing that I have tried to encourage my clients to do is to, I love those questions. Like, what is your body feeling right now? And I think it's I want to say to parents who are listening, this is really hard because my appetite, desire, level of fullness is totally different than the 3 other people who sit at my dinner table. So I couldn't tell them when to stop or start. I just couldn't because it's not my body. And so it's really hard. And one thing that comes up a lot with my clients, Emilie, I'm wondering around this in particular, is that, and this is just my experiences with moms, that they see their kids as more hearty eaters. They know enough because we've lived in this world that they shouldn't say anything. But they're so anxious about, oh my God, what's going to happen? Exactly. So you're doing this. No one's going to be able to see on the podcast, but I'm so grateful you said that because it's like, even if you're not saying something, what is your body doing?
Saying.
How often are you looking at the plate? How often are you looking, in my experience, my mom used to always look at my stomach, right? Like, what are you looking at? What are you focusing on? How are you talking about food? So I just want to say, and I say to my clients, this is really hard work. It's like, because you can't really use your body to gauge.
Right.
Exactly.
And if they're hungry for seconds, if they're hungry for thirds, you kind of have to trust them, actually. at the end of the day. And that's really hard to give
Right.
over as a parent. It's really hard to
really
give
hard.
over that trust to your child because their brains aren't fully developed. There feels like there's so many like red flags, like absolutely I should not just trust my child. But if we start that relationship of trust now, how amazing will it be, 5, 10, 15 years down the road when you've shown that you trust them to dictate what they put in their bodies and that is respected, that becomes their expectation towards everybody else. So it becomes their expectation that they should be trusted about what is going on with their own bodies, that they should be trusted that XY is not okay with their own bodies, that they're full or hungry, but also with, some more kind of uncomfortable, right? Exactly.
Yes.
Some bigger topics here that they can
Yeah.
trust their own bodies implicitly, and that their parents have shown them that they can trust their own bodies implicitly, and that then that's the full stop. That's the be all and end
Right.
all. So yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's really crucial and it's uncomfortable, right? Like you don't want, again, it feels like the small human being who screams when the, I don't know, block is the wrong color is telling me that they're so hungry after 2 huge meals. Like that feels really uncomfortable. But you don't know what's going on in their own body. You don't know whether they're going through a growth spurt.
Right.
You don't
Right.
know whether, at school they ate this tiny little, like, a dime size piece of food and then they're coming home starving. And so they need 12 million plates to kind of fill that cup. You have no idea. We just don't know what anybody else, including our children, are going through. So yes, it feels uncomfortable to have them eat 3 meals. And again, it's that kind of point of privilege where like, if money is tight, that may feel really, really uncomfortable because you expected that food to go further. And so that all is really hard to kind of come into that conversation of like, I trust you and we will make it work. It's my responsibility as a parent not to put that on my kid or to stretch the next meal a little bit further or whatever needs to happen, but to be able to go through all of that and not put that on your kid and to have them be able to eat their fill and trust their own bodies. And then if that feels uncomfortable to you as you go forward gradually, I'm not saying like do it all at once because then that freaks kids out and often then they push back because they feel uncomfortable. But start to kind of try to ease towards the 6 meals a day, right? To introduce those mini meals so that they don't feel like at the end of the day they're starving and need to eat all the food. But if you can if that is easier for your brain as a parent to figure out, then slowly kind of try to ease towards that, offering food far more frequently than it's going to feel uncomfortable. All of it's going to feel uncomfortable, but ease towards offering more food throughout the day, which feels counterintuitive, particularly if you feel like you have a hard eater, but offering food more often if they aren't truly hungry and it is more of a control thing or a fear thing, offering food more often is actually going to decrease that because they're going to be allowed to have opportunities to eat throughout the day and it's not going to get to the end or to the beginning or whatever. And they feel panicked about food.
I remember a question that I was going to ask earlier with regard to mindless eating. I'm sure that I know the answer to this, but I would love to hear it from you. What about eating in front of the TV or eating in front of a screen?
Yes. I mean, the easy answer is
Don't do
try
it.
not to do it. Don't do it. Just don't. Don't introduce it. Don't like the moment that you introduce it. It's a hard thing. I mean, right, like we expect our kids to do something different than we're doing. How often do we have our phones out at the dinner table? Again, at the end of a long day and I'm exhausted. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you that I don't like pick up my phone and mindlessly scroll while I'm eating. Like that happens. So once you introduce that as an option for a child, and their brains aren't as developed as ours are, so putting a stop on that is going to be really, really, really hard, because it's, screens fire all those like dopamine receptors, and it's an addicting thing, an addicting activity, but it also then messes with our understanding of how full or not full we are, because some of the same chemicals are flooding our bodies when we eat tasty food and when we look at a screen. And so that gets really confusing really quickly. And that being said, like, how often, how often do us as adults, like once our kids go to bed,
100%.
Right.
sit on the table, you sit at the couch and either have dessert or have our meal. If we're not, I'm not, again, there are times in our lives where we have not been able to all sit down at the dinner table all together. We really, really try hard to do it at this point. But when our oldest was younger, it felt impossible to get off of work and to feed him and to all get to the table at once. So those times, he ate before us, and then he went to bed, and then we ate afterwards. And yes, of course we were in front of the TV, because that's kind of how it works. Everything in moderation, ultimately. But if you can avoid it at all costs, do, because it's just it opens a can of worms that is really difficult to put back. And that's that. And there are ways to wean them off of it. If you've already introduced screens, I often see parents use them as like a distracting tool for like a picky eater who's not eating, and they put a screen in front of them and then like kind of sneak bites in, which is not good.
Not good.
Is really a problem on a lot of different levels. But if you've done that, there are ways to slowly pull that back. And so it's not a lost cause if you have gone down that road. And I would start to go into it, but it is a big topic to try to pull back from. So
if you're having that problem, we're going to send you to Emily.
Come talk to me.
She can help you with that for sure. There's something that you said earlier, Emily, that I think that, you said it's about helping kids trust themselves. Mm-hmm. You said trust yourself. And I think that for Julie and I, that could be, a tagline of this podcast. And I'm so grateful that you shared that. And it's making me reflect that maybe, and this of course comes from our diet culture, what if we thought about feeding times or food as a time to get to know ourselves better and to really teach our kids how to trust themselves? Like, what if we just shed, this, I grew up in the, 80s, 90s, the fat free, whatever the thing was, the snack wells, the, Olestra. Like if it was really not about finding even the right food, but helping your kid trust their intuition and physical instincts. Like, what if it was an experiment every night of doing that instead of getting them to do, and Julie and I talk about this a lot, like the right thing, right? Like, it's just so much more open and flowy and collaborative and curious,
right,
and so much less in some ways like power over. It's like this curiosity together of what does your body need tonight? And I was thinking, very often if I'll have a really large meal, the next day I might not eat that much. And that, right. And so it's like, there's a flow, and not being able to trust your own body's flow or your own kid's flow. I think that causes, a lot of tension. So I just love this idea that you introduced of like trusting yourself. And what if food times were about trusting yourself?
Yeah. I mean, and I think again, that's it. That is the key. That's the crux of being willing to, again, you are setting boundaries. This is what's on your plate. This is what's on the menu tonight. And this is the time that we eat, to a certain extent. We're not going to we try not to have a hard cutoff, but I do have kids who also will sit there for an hour and a half. And there are certain, you do have to set boundaries, right? There ultimately are boundaries in our society of when we eat, that we don't take hours and hours and hours because we have to go do the next thing.
So my question, Emily, was about the kid who sits at the table and wants to take 500 years to finish, or what feels like 500 years. And so my thought about it is, that it's probably something about either control of the environment or attention seeking or something like that. So how does a parent put a limit on that without it seeming like they're putting a limit on the amount of food that the child is eating?
So that's a really tricky, that's just really hard.
I told you I had a hard
And it's
question for you.
it's good. Yeah, it's great. I think that, and I hate to have the answer of like, it depends on the kid,
I
because
understand.
I want to be able to give an easy, quick answer. But I think it really does depend on your child, and whether it is, more kind of attention based, or if it's control based. You kind of have to try to tease apart what is going on, like what the underlying cause is. But usually I try to say, look, we have other things that we need to do. And so today, when we eat, we have to be done by X time. And again, that's going to depend on your kid. Sometimes I've had success having your phone or your watch, as after I said like no screens, but this is a little bit different. But having some sort of kind of visual representation of how much time they have, so that they can hopefully adjust their speed to how much time they can see is left. Now, is that going to work for every kid? No, because some kids are going to get really hyper perseverative over it and really hyper focus. And then you're going to have a problem there, because then all they want to do is stare at the phone and do nothing else the whole time.
And it also occurs to me that it could create some anxiety. I have to be finished by X o'clock. Right.
By some time. Sometimes I've had success kind of giving a countdown where it's not a physical thing, where they can see the time left. But, parents say, okay, in 30 minutes, we're going to be all done with our meal. And then we'll be able to have another snack soon, and try to make that time period pretty short, so that there's no feeling of deprivation there, because the food is going to be here pretty soon after. And remember that children can't tell time. Most children can't tell time. So, the idea of like 20 minutes is very fluid. And so if you have a kid who does seem really ravenous or really upset or whatever, that 20 minutes can be very flexible. Okay, now it's 1 minute.
Right.
And then here we go. Here's our next opportunity to eat. But having something where you say, okay, we have 30 minutes and then we have to be all done with our food so that we can XYZ, which inevitably there's something, right? There's always something that you have to go do. And it gives you a good opportunity just to blame the activity. So it's not, you can't have any more food because I don't want you to have more food, but food has to be done at this time because we have to go do the next activity.
I'm also curious, if there is no next activity, is it viable to say, for example, sweetie, you can take as long as you need to eat. I have to go do X, Y, or Z. I have to. Okay.
Absolutely.
So it's okay to leave them to sit at the table by themselves to finish eating.
Absolutely. With the exception of if they're still young enough, I want to say that it's 3, but each child is going to be individual. There is a cutoff at which the choking risk goes down. And I want to say that it's 3 or 3.5, maybe as late as 4, where you really shouldn't leave a child unsupervised, because it's just not safe. But you could hover close by, you could be in the kitchen, you could do whatever. And I would also say that, like, make sure that eating is the primary focus. We talked about no screens. We say that toys are asleep when we're eating at the table, so toys don't come to the table with us. Toys have to stay wherever they are, in the playroom, living room, whatever, in your room, in the child's room. but making sure that there's not a ton of distractions, because that I find that happens too, where a child is like very easily, just like playing with other stuff, and so then is kind of distracted and not eating. But yes, you can absolutely say you can have as much time as you want, and I have to go at this point because I have something that I need to.
And it could even be cleaning up the kitchen or right.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I
Right,
mean,
just to remove the possibility of you being your attention being the reason why they're staying, right, Julie? Is
Yeah,
that where your
yeah,
question is coming from?
exactly.
absolutely. And that's what I kind of said, like, there's always something to get done, right? Like, there's always, and particularly if you're finding yourself in this situation, I mean, we do it in our household a decent amount, honestly, where we come up with something that has to get done next. So that there is kind of a natural boundary that exists within our day-to-day activities, so that there is a cutoff, that there kind of is a natural cutoff because we are moving to the next activity. But it doesn't have to be we're going to the amusement park. It can be now it's time to go clean up our playroom, or it's now time to go read some books, or it's time to go work on an art project, or whatever the case may be. There's always something to do. And whether that's individual as a parent or as a family unit, it just gives a little bit more structure to the day, and therefore the mealtime, to kind of have that as an option. Again, without saying like the food is the issue, but that there's other stuff going on in our lives that we kind of have to move, and that then there's a quick turnaround to the next opportunity where food is presented.
I wanted to just throw out there an idea for parents of older children who may have already associated, screens, their iPad is in front of them while they eat. And I think this is an okay idea, but Emily, you'll tell me if I'm wrong. To replace it with family conversation, but in a structured way. So
Absolutely.
there are these. I don't get paid for promoting this product, by the way, but there's a set of acrylic boxes that have cards in them with questions or thought provoking communication cards. I think it's called table topics, and so to have that, and while they're eating, instead of having screens, pull a card and give your opinion about it. And it's anything from what's your favorite movie of all time to did something super funny happen to you today, to so it's very engaging and communicative. So I'm assuming that kind of thing is a good idea. I find that even teenagers, right, are really more interested in being engaged with
Mm-hmm.
people than they are with their screens. I mean, they may be addicted to the engagement on the screens because of the dopamine hits that they get from it. But ultimately, we're not meant to be on screens. Ultimately, we're meant to be in relationship with people. And I think it's something that's really missing for a lot of kids who, I mean, as young as fourth grade are being given phones and screens, and even younger being given screens,
Yeah.
right?
Even younger, yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to mention that the teenage version of not having, toys at the table. I'm also is making me think about parents really being discriminating about what they bring up at the table, and guilty as charged. My daughter has said so many times to me, I do not want to talk about school at the dinner table. I don't want to go over my schedule. I don't want to go over my grades. And I think it's really important when we're thinking about this idea of trusting yourself and kids learning what they like to eat. Like, is that space safe for them to do those things? Because trusting your body and knowing what you want, you need kind of a safe space where you're not going to have to be kind of pushing back against questions. And I get it, parents of teens, as parent of teens, it might be the only time you see them during the day. So that was why I kept asking her, because we couldn't otherwise, I wouldn't know the answer. but it gave me an opportunity to find other times. And so I think it's really important for us to also think about what we're saying. And as Emilie shared earlier, or what our body language is doing at the table, really think about the whole space. And, not all families do anything, like grace, but the idea of just kind of some ritual of this is a time when we are coming together. Sometimes parents, I've suggested, do like a rose and a thorn at the table, or something to just kind of mark that this is a different moment than all the other moments of our day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that it's tempting to, even I don't have a teenager yet. I will someday. But even at this age, it's very tempting to say, how was school today? And it almost feels like that's just the default. Like, okay, if I want to have conversation, that's the question that I ask. But they do make these amazing, like the tabletops for all ages. They make them for like young kids, and they make them for all adults and everything in between. So I think that that's a great opportunity. And if you, again, point of privilege, to be able to like purchase something like that, Google at the library, and they have lists that you can find online.
Yes.
And if you don't have access to that at home, that's fine. The library or some other community resource to be able to download a list of topics. And again, there are ways to print that out for free or write it down or whatever you might need to do to be able to have options that aren't paid, so that is also an option.
So I think this may be a good place for us to stop. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We may get questions from our listeners, in which case, Emilie, I hope you'll come back in any case. This is, I didn't get to ask the hardest question, and I'll save it for another time. But the question is really, what about kids who are on ADHD medicine and they have...
I was going to ask that as a parent just the other day of my kid who isn't hungry and then gets during the middle of the day and then is ravenous, and then an hour before dinner, do you force yourself to eat? Great.
Yeah,
let's have her back to answer that question.
We'll give you a chance to think about it. It's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah, exactly. That's not an easy question. So, but just for the parents out there, know that we get it and we understand, and it is really hard.
So thank you so much for being with us today, Emilie. Elizabeth, as always, it's wonderful to see you. And to our listeners, if you want to get in contact with Emilie, her name is Emilie, her email, is this correct? Maybe you better say it.
My email is Emilie@EmilieVogas.com. So Emilie, Emilie at the same Emilie Vogas, V as in Victor, OGAS.com. And that's my website too, as well. So that last little bit is EmilieVogas.com.
They can call and ask when, for either a private appointment, or they can ask what your upcoming workshops are. And I hope that they will, because you have so much wisdom to share, and we really appreciate it. All right, guys.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast. If you would like to reach Elizabeth Cohen, you can go to www.centerforcbtinnyc.com.
And if you'd like to reach Julie Ross, please go to www.parentinghorizons.com.